The prize money was $15,000, and by Sunday afternoon, nobody had come close. The announcer at the Harlan County Woodcraft Invitational had said it the same way every hour on the hour since the doors opened Saturday morning. $15,000 to whoever could build a working dovetail chest in under 4 hours, by hand, no power tools, no jigs, no templates. Joints had to fit flush. Lid had to seat square. The piece had to hold 50 pounds of sand without creaking. 17 craftsmen had tried across 2 days. 17 had walked away. The closest had been a man named Derek Callum, 29 years old, out of Portland, who ran a custom furniture shop with 11 employees and a 6-month wait list. He'd gotten the carcass together in 3 hours and 40 minutes. Clean lines, decent fit. And then the lid had rocked a 1/4 inch on the left rear corner, and the judge had set the sandbag down and shaken his head without saying anything. Derek had stared at the lid for a long time before picking up his chisels and putting them in the bag one by one. The competition floor at the Lexington Expo Center smelled like white oak shavings and linseed oil. The big overhead lights made everything look a little flatter than it was. Vendors were starting to break down their booths along the south wall. A group of high school kids who'd come in with a woodshop teachers were losing interest near the hand-plane display and drifting toward the parking lot. That was when the hand went up near the tool rental counter, slow. Not tentative, just slow, the way a man moves when he has learned there is no reason to hurry most things. The hand belonged to a man in a faded canvas work shirt and brown Carhartt pants that had been washed so many times the knees had gone soft. He was wearing reading glasses on a cord around his neck. He had a small leather roll of tools tucked under his left arm the way some men carry a paperback novel. His hair was white and cut close to the skull. He was somewhere on the far side of 70, and he had the hands of a man who had been using them carefully and consistently for most of his life. "I'd like to try," he said. Derek Callum, who was still near the competition table, looked over. He didn't say anything unkind. He didn't have to. The look was enough. A half-second scan that started at the white hair and ended at the leather roll with a small adjustment of the jaw that meant he'd already done the math and didn't like the answer for the old man's sake. Type respect in the comments if you've ever been dismissed before you opened your mouth. His name was Raymond Kowalczyk. He was 74 years old, and he had driven the 91 miles from his house outside Berea in a 2003 Chevy pickup with a cracked dashboard and a bag of black walnuts on the passenger seat that he'd meant to shell for 3 weeks. He had come because his granddaughter Lily, who was 22 and studying industrial design at UK, had asked him to bring her on Saturday, and then on Sunday morning she'd had a study group she couldn't miss, and Raymond had decided to stay anyway because he'd paid for the parking and because the oak they were using for the competition. Blanks looked like good flat sawn stock, and he wanted to see it up close. He had not planned to enter. He had watched the competition from a folding chair for most of Saturday afternoon and all of Sunday morning. He had watched Derek Callum work with the focused intensity of a man who knew he was being observed and wanted to be. He had watched 2 other Nashville, one from Cincinnati, rush their baseline cuts and pay for it in the fitting. He had not said anything to anyone. He had eaten a sandwich from his truck at noon and come back in and watched some more. The competition director was a woman named Patricia Shen, 53, who'd run the Invitational for 8 years and had the particular ability of people who manage complex events to notice everything that doesn't belong without making it obvious she'd noticed. She had seen Raymond arrive Saturday morning. She had noted, without analyzing it, that he sat differently than the other spectators. Forward in the chair instead of back, elbows on knees, eyes on the work instead of the crowd. She had noted the leather tool roll under his arm, which he'd been carrying since he walked in, like it hadn't occurred to him to set it down. When his hand went up, Patricia was across the floor. She came over before the announcer could finish processing the request. "Sir," she said, "you're looking to take a run at it?" Raymond nodded. "You'll need to use the house lumber. We've got 2 blanks left, white oak, 8/4, already dimensioned to rough size." "That'll be fine," Raymond said. "Tools are your own?" He patted the leather roll. Patricia looked at him for a moment. Not the way Derek had looked, not the math and epistle, but the way you look at something you almost recognize, like a word in a language you studied a long time ago. She had been around Craftsman for a long time. She couldn't place what she was seeing, but she knew the shape of it. "The clock starts when you pick up your first tool," she said. 4 hours. Judges will inspect fit and function at time. Any questions? What species is the hinge blank? Raymond asked. Patricia blinked. Hard maple. Raymond nodded once, the small nod of a man confirming a thing he already suspected. That'll do, he said. He carried both lumber blanks to the table himself. He set his tool roll down and opened it without ceremony. The tools inside were not new. The chisels had handles worn dark from years of palm contact, the kind of wear that comes from 10,000 hours and not from display. The marking gauge was a wooden-bodied model that hadn't been manufactured since the 1980s. The hand saw, a crosscut, 8-point, had a handle that had been repaired with a piece of copper wire at the front boss, wrapped tight and left there, functional, unbeautiful. He did not ask for the shooting board. He looked at the bench for a moment, placed his lumber, and picked up the marking gauge. Derek Callum had drifted back. So had two of the vendors who'd been packing boxes. The woodshop teacher with the high school kids had stopped them from leaving. Patricia had said something quietly into her radio, and the second judge, a man named Grant Elmore, who had been a cabinet maker for 31 years and currently taught at a community college in Bowling Green, had come out from the break room still holding his coffee. Nobody announced that something was happening. They just gathered the way people gather when something is. Raymond Kowalczyk laid out his baseline with a marking gauge in 40 seconds. He did not measure twice in the way beginners are taught to mean the phrase. He measured once, with an exactness that came from understanding the material rather than checking it, and his lines were true. If you've ever watched someone who genuinely knows what they're doing begin a piece of work, you know what it looks like. It doesn't look hurried. It doesn't look slow. It looks like the movement of a thing that has been calibrated to exactly the task. No wasted arc, no hesitation between steps, no consultation with anything outside the work itself. Raymond began his tales first. His dovetail saw moved through the oak in long, low strokes, and the kerf it left was clean-walled and consistent. He worked without marking a slope guide. He had internalized the ratio. 1:6 for hardwood, tighter than the standard, the kind of judgment that doesn't come from a book. Grant Elmore, standing at the edge of the crowd with his coffee going cold, watched Raymond remove the waste between tails with a coping saw and then refine it with a 1/4-inch chisel, and he set his coffee cup down on a vendor table behind him without looking for it. "Who is this guy?" he said, to no one in particular. Nobody answered him. 45 minutes in, Raymond had both tailboards laid out and roughed. He had not rushed a single cut. He had also not wasted one. The pace was something Grant had been trying to describe to students for 3 decades. The difference between speed and efficiency, between hurrying and knowing. Raymond was not hurrying. Raymond was not wasting. The two things produced externally a result that looked like calm speed. Derek Callum was standing with his arms crossed now, watching with the expression of a man who has been certain about something and is becoming less certain. He had rebuilt his lid joint twice on his own attempt. Raymond had not checked his fit once yet, and Derek had the uncomfortable feeling, watching, that Raymond wasn't going to need to. The crowd had grown to maybe 40 people. A woman who had been running a tool sharpening demonstration on the far side of the hall had simply stopped her demonstration and come over, still holding a card scraper she'd been flattening. Raymond transferred his tails to his pin boards at the 1:40 mark, scribing them directly. No pencil transcription, just the chisels laid against the tails and scored. He was using a method that Grant Elmore recognized and that he had only seen in person one other time, at a furniture exhibition in Philadelphia in 2009, demonstrated by a man who had learned it from a master joiner in the school of James Krenov. At 2 hours and 12 minutes, Raymond dry-fitted his first corner. The joint went together with the sound that hand-cut dovetails make when they are cut correctly, a soft percussive shuck as the pins entered the tails, the wood compressing fractionally, the joint seating fully without being forced. It went together to the shoulder line. It had no visible gap on either face. The crowd was quiet. Derek's arms had come uncrossed. He was standing with his hands at his sides. Patricia Shen was no longer pretending to do other things. She was watching. Raymond did not react to the fit. He disassembled the joint, set the pieces aside and began the second corner. At 3 hours and 7 minutes, he had all 4 corners fitted and set aside. He began work on the lid frame. His rebate plane, another old tool, a record 778 with a replacement fence screw, moved across the maple in long, even passes, and the shaving it produced was translucent, continuous, the kind that curls off and falls in a single unbroken ribbon when the iron is set correctly and the hand is steady. The high school kids had come back in. One of them, a boy in a Wildcat sweatshirt, was filming on his phone with the particular stillness of a teenager who has unexpectedly encountered something worth paying attention to. At 3 hours and 44 minutes, Raymond assembled the chest dry, without glue, to check the overall square. He set it on the bench, looked at it from above, and without a square or a winding stick, placed both thumbs on opposite corners of the lid and pressed once. The lid seated flat. He pressed the other diagonal, flat. He picked up a small bottle of old brown glue from his roll, hide glue pre-mixed, the kind that requires no heating, and began his final assembly. Grant Elmore was standing 2 feet from the bench now. He had been standing 2 feet from the bench for an hour and hadn't noticed himself moving there. "Sir," he said quietly, while Raymond was working glue into the first joint. I don't want to break your concentration, but that's a Krenov-trained hand if I've ever seen one." Raymond didn't look up. He was distributing glue with his fingertip, even pressure, working quickly now that the hide glue was open. "Not exactly," Raymond said, "though I know the tradition." At 3 hours and 58 minutes, Raymond set the assembled chest on the bench, seated the lid, and placed both hands flat on the top for a moment. Then he took them away. The chest sat square. The joints were flush. The lid had no rock. The grain had been oriented so that the figure in the oak ran continuously across the front face, breaking at the corner and continuing around the side, a detail that requires the lumber to be ripped from a single board and arranged before cutting, a detail that nobody had asked for and that Raymond had done anyway. Patricia Shen stepped forward. "Clock?" she said. The timekeeper looked at his sheet. 3 hours, 58 minutes, 30 seconds. The announcer had his microphone in his hand and seemed to have momentarily forgotten what it was for. Grant Elmore looked at the chest. He walked around it once. He crouched to look at the corner joints at eye level. He pressed on both lid diagonals. He straightened up. "Clean," he said. He said it to Patricia. He said it the way a man says a word when the word is the only thing available. Patricia nodded and came forward with the sandbag. 50 pounds. She placed it in the center of the chest. The chest did not creak. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Derek Callum was looking at the floor. Not in a theatrical way, in the specific way a person looks at the floor when they are recalibrating something they believed about themselves. His jaw was set. He was doing the work of a man who has been genuinely humbled and is deciding what to do with it. The boy in the Wildcat sweatshirt was still filming. Raymond was already beginning to gather his tools, rolling the chisels back into the leather one by one. His movements were the same as they had been at the beginning, unhurried, without ceremony. A man had separated from the edge of the crowd and was walking toward the table. He moved deliberately, the walk of someone who has something to say and is choosing his moment. He was in his mid-50s, broad in the shoulder, wearing a sport coat over a flannel shirt. His name badge read Thomas Hargrove, Preservation Craftsman, Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Thomas Hargrove had been at the Lexington Invitational for 2 days as a guest judge for a separate marquetry competition that had concluded Saturday afternoon. He had been planning to leave that morning and had instead stayed because something about the light on the competition floor reminded him of the joiner's shop in Williamsburg, and he had been having a hard autumn and wasn't ready to go back to an empty house in Williamsburg, Virginia. He had watched Raymond work for the last 2 hours from a position near the edge of the crowd, and he had said nothing to the people around him, because what he was watching required his full attention, and because he was not yet sure enough in what he thought he was seeing to say it out loud. He stopped at the end of the bench. He looked at the chest for a long moment. He looked at the tool roll, which was half-rolled now, the handles visible. He looked at the rebate plane, the 778 with its repaired fence screw. Then he looked at Raymond. "Your lid frame," Hargrove said, "haunched mortise and tenon at the corners." It wasn't a question. Raymond looked at him for the first time since Hargrove had walked over. "The right choice for maple moving against oak," Raymond said. Hargrove nodded slowly. "It is the right choice. It's also not in any of the published manuals. It's oral tradition from the Federal period shops." He paused. "Where did you learn that?" Raymond finished rolling the last chisel into the leather. "Man named Aldous Pemberton," he said. "Long time ago." Hargrove's expression changed. It changed the way a landscape changes when the cloud cover breaks. Not a dramatic shift, but a suddenly different quality of light over the same ground. He was quiet for a moment. Aldous Pemberton, he said. He said it carefully, the way you say the name of someone you have been taught to respect before you ever met them, of the Appalachian Woodcraft Preservation Program. Raymond didn't answer. He was tying off the leather roll. I studied under a man who studied under Pemberton, Hargrove said. He was speaking more quietly now, so that only the people immediately around the bench could hear. Pemberton retired in 1987. He documented 18 pre-industrial joinery techniques that are now in the Library of Congress. Most of them had never been written down. He stopped. He looked at the chest. He trained 12 apprentices over 40 years. I have spent 23 years tracking down what they did with what he gave them. He looked back at Raymond. I never found one who could still work. Raymond set his tool roll under his arm. You came close, Raymond said. 7 of them are gone, Hargrove said. 3 I found in their 70s, hands too far gone for the fine work. 1 I couldn't locate. He paused. 1 I found in Berea, Kentucky. He'd been running a small repair shop out of his garage. I reached out 3 years ago through a Woodcraft Association directory. He never wrote back. Raymond looked at him then with the same expression. Not hostile, not warm. Something quieter than either. The expression of a man who has been located. Patricia Shen had been standing close enough to hear. She looked at Raymond. She thought about the 8 years she'd run this invitational. She thought about the tool roll he'd been carrying since Saturday morning. She thought about why a man who carried tools like that would sit in a folding chair for 2 days before raising his hand. She didn't ask. Grant Elmore stepped forward. He had the expression of a man who has taught long enough to understand what it costs when knowledge disappears. Mr. Kowalczyk, he said, if I could ask the 15,000. Is there? Does it go? Raymond looked at him, then at Patricia, then at the chest which was still sitting on the bench with the sandbag inside it, square and quiet and completely without flaw. Make it out to the Berea Craft Apprenticeship Program, Raymond said. They run a summer residency for kids from the hollow communities who don't have access to shop education. They'll know what to do with it. Patricia nodded and didn't try to talk him into keeping any of it. Derek Callum walked over. He had his cap off. He had not taken it off at any point during 2 days of competition, and he'd taken it off now. Sir, he said. He stopped. He started again. I think I've been building furniture for 8 years, and I watched you work today, and I'm not sure I understand what I've been doing. He looked at the chest. Is there anything you'd tell someone who wanted to? Raymond looked at him for a moment. He was shorter than Derek by about 4 inches, and he looked at him the way you look at someone when you are deciding whether they mean what they're asking. Come by sometime, Raymond said. I'm in Berea, not hard to find. I'll show you what Pemberton showed me, some of it anyway. He put a hand briefly on Derek's forearm, the contact of a man who spent his life working with his hands and didn't find touch awkward. You've got a good eye. You rushed your baseline on Sunday. If you stop rushing your baseline, the rest of it will settle. Derek nodded 4 times quickly and didn't try to say anything else. Thomas Hargrove walked Raymond and his granddaughter's empty passenger seat out to the parking lot. Lily had texted twice asking how the day went, and Raymond had not answered yet because he was still deciding what to say that wouldn't sound like too much. Hargrove held the truck door while Raymond climbed in, slowly, because his left hip had been replaced once and was due to be replaced again, and he knew it but hadn't scheduled it. Before Hargrove closed the door, he leaned in the window frame. Mr. Kowalczyk. The Williamsburg Foundation, we have a documentation program for pre-industrial techniques that exist only in living practitioners. We have a standing open invitation for craftsmen who... Raymond looked at him through the open window. The parking lot had the low, flat light of a late Sunday afternoon, the kind that makes everything look a little used and a little gold. I'll think about it, Raymond said. You tell your students something for me, though. Hargrove waited. Tell them the wood doesn't care how many tools you own. Raymond put the truck in reverse. It only cares whether you've been paying attention to it. Hargrove stepped back. He stood in the parking lot until the Chevy had turned out onto the county road and the taillights had gone small, and then disappeared around the curve of a hill that had a line of old hardwoods along its crest, their leaves at their very last colour, hanging in the still air of a Lexington October like something that knew it was about to let go. The chest stayed on the competition table for another hour before anyone moved it. The judges had filled out their paperwork, and the vendors had finished breaking down their booths, and the announcer had long since stopped looking for anything to say. The overhead lights were still on, and in that flat expo center light, the white oak of the chest looked like it had been there a long time. The joints were invisible at any distance greater than a foot. The lid sat with the patience of a thing that had been made to last. Each corner had one set of dovetails in it, cut clean, fitted close, the pins and tails holding each other the way two things hold each other when they have been shaped precisely for the purpose. Not with force, not with hardware, but with attention so long and so practiced that it had become indistinguishable from instinct. If this story found something in you, if you believe that what the hands learn is never fully forgotten, that the quiet man in the folding chair is sometimes the only one in the room who knows what's actually possible, then stay with us. Subscribe to Echoes of Valor. We are here for the ones who came home and went back to work and never stopped knowing exactly what they were doing. Their stories don't make the news, but they're the ones worth keeping.